Once again, the do your own research crowd doesn't bother to do any research. This person comes in and says, crime is all times high everywhere. I'm going to go ahead and assume that English is your second language because that's not how it's said here in America. Crime is at an all-time high everywhere is, I think, what you were trying to say, and that's inaccurate. From March of this year, the case of the falling crime rate. The national crime rate is down. The news is interesting enough by itself, but there are three more surprising stories behind it. The declining crime rate has broken records. The violent crime rate reached a 50-year low in 2023, according to a report from the Council on Criminal Justice. The number of murders in America fell by over 12%, the largest decline in our history, according to Datalytics. Our murder rate is now lower than it was in the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s. Most people don't know crime is down. In fact, they think the exact opposite. Kind of like you. A Gallup poll from November of 23 found 77% of Americans believed there was more crime in the country than the year before, and 63% felt America had a very serious or extremely serious crime problem, the highest percentage recorded since 2000. These beliefs are understandable when you consider what many older Americans have grown up with. A crime wave began in the 1960s, which was attributed to the sharp increase in urban populations, societal unrest arising from civil rights and anti-war movements, and the spread of illegal drug use. Baby boomers lived with an almost constantly growing rate of violent crime from the 1960s up to the 1990s. See, they put it here in picture form so even folks like you can get it. Crime statistics continued to grow until reaching a peak in 1991. The crime rate then fell until 2019 and the beginning of the COVID epidemic, when crime suddenly increased. In fact, the pandemic made 2020 one of America's most dangerous years. Under Trump. Shocker. Some of the reasons, according to the New York Times, were that police officers cut back on their personal contact with members of their community and had to deal with staff shortages. School shutdowns put teens on the streets, and social service programs that reduced violence had to scale back. Then, in May of 2020, the killing of George Floyd raised mistrust in police. Some people took the law into their own hands. FBI statistics from those years show a 30% increase in the number of murders, while other violent crime rose 5%. At the time, the resurgence of crime received broad media attention. The decline that followed the end of COVID drew less notice or was ignored altogether in favor of a more lurid narrative. So if you ask the average American who hasn't been reading crime statistics if the rate of crime is rising or falling, they could perceive that it's going up. But Tom, that was from back at the beginning of 2024, and it only talked about 2023. What about 2024? Well, 2024 is not over yet, so we don't have the full year statistics, but we do have the first half year statistics, and we can look at those now. This is from July of this year, Crime Trends in U.S. Cities Mid-Year 2024 Update. This study updates and supplements previous U.S. crime trends reports by the Council on Criminal Justice with additional data through June of 2024. It examines monthly crime rates for 12 violent, property, and drug offenses in 39 American cities that have consistently reported monthly data over the past 6 years. The 39 cities are not necessarily representative of all jurisdictions in the United States. Not all cities reported data for each offense. Trends in offenses with fewer reporting cities should be viewed with caution. In addition, the data collected for this report are subject to revision by local jurisdictions. Now, into the numbers. 11 of the 12 offenses covered in this report were lower than in the first half of 2024 than in the first half of 2023, which we already saw record low numbers of crime in some areas. Looking at violent offenses, the number of homicides in the 29 cities providing data for the crime was 13% lower, 319 fewer homicides during the first half of 2024 than in the first half of 2023. There were 7% fewer reported aggravated assaults and 18% fewer gun assaults in the first half of 2024 than during the same period of 2023. Reported carjacking incidents fell by 26%, while robberies and domestic violence incidences declined by 6% and 2%, respectively. Motor vehicle theft, a crime that has been on the rise since the summer of 2020, continued its upward trajectory through 2023. That trend reversed in the first half of 2024, however, as there were 18% fewer motor vehicle thefts compared to the first half of 2023. Reports of residential burglaries down 14%, non-residential burglaries down 10%, larcenies down 6%, and drug offenses down 2%, all decreased in the first half of 2024 compared to the first half of 2023. But rates of reported shoplifting and crime that has received extensive attention from the media and policymakers increased by 24%. Overall, most violent crimes are at or below levels seen since 2019, the year prior to the onset of the COVID pandemic and racial justice protests of 2020. There were 2% fewer homicides during the first half of 2024 than during the first half of 2019, and 15% fewer robberies. Aggravated assaults and domestic violence incidents are also below levels seen 5 years ago. Gun assaults were 1% higher during the first half of 2024 than during the first half of 2019, and carjacking, a crime that is relatively uncommon but began to spike shortly after the onset of the pandemic, was 68% higher. So, if we could just put a bow on this, you need to stop listening to right-wing propaganda AM radio and start looking at the actual fucking stats.